House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is trying to qualify his denial of tensions with former President Trump over the January 6th insurrection. Republican Congressman Andy Biggs says McCarthy's words have created, quote, a huge trust issue for me. The Arizona congressman also says the comments undermine McCarthy's leadership position. Biggs is among the first House Republicans to publicly criticize the minority leader. We expected there'd be some of this as Congress comes back into session this week. For more, we're joined now by CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. Scott, great to see you, sir. Welcome back to Congress, and good to see you back up there. Arguably the most noteworthy trial so far in the January 6th U.S. Capitol prosecution is now underway. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, Ed, this is the one we've been waiting for, at least so far. The defendant's name is Thomas Webster. It's his backstory that's so intriguing. Not only is he a former Marine, he's a former police officer, a New York City police officer who at one point was assigned to the mayor's detail. And on January 6th, right here on Capitol Hill, he's accused of assaulting police while amid the mob. Thomas Webster is also going to be the first January 6th defendant at trial to argue self-defense. This body camera footage you're watching, obtained by CBS News from the Justice Department under court order, will show Webster in the red coat amid the mob, facing off with police. Let's see how this self-defense argument goes. But here's what I can tell you so far. There have been at least 3 defendants to face a jury to make their case, and each of those 3 has been convicted on all counts. Watch this case. It could send a message, Ed, to the hundreds of other defendants who've yet to face a trial, who've yet to plead guilty, and face the prospect of facing off with a D.C. jury.
And again, it's that guy in the red coat, and this is video that hasn't really been disseminated widely, right?
That's right. Thomas Webster has pleaded not guilty, wearing the red coat and carrying the flag and the flagpole. That flagpole, Ed, is going to come up in the prosecution's case. Jury selection wrapped yesterday. The case launched today, expected to go a week or two at the D.C. federal courthouse, which is, not coincidentally, just down the road from here at the Capitol.
Sure is. Now, those are the foot soldiers. There's also, of course, the focus on the ringleaders. And the January 6th committee seems to be leaning hard on former North Carolina Congressman turned White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, especially with its weekend court filing. And there were some text messages released yesterday that are also, of course, significant. Is the committee expecting Meadows to come back to talk to them? And what do they expect he would tell them at this point?
Well, they're certainly upping the pressure. Their late Friday night court filing includes just troves of messages they say were sent to or from Mark Meadows, including from Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio, a text message to which Meadows expresses some support for challenging the electoral count. A message from Republican Scott Perry of Pennsylvania talking about possible machinations with the Justice Department after Election Day. And messages from Donald Trump Jr., messages to Sean Hannity, just this trove of messages as the committee argues it doesn't have everything and needs more. Meadows has given over some text messages and withheld others, and the January 6th committee is trying to apply that pressure on Meadows to submit more and perhaps submit himself for a deposition. Somebody else, Ed, is informally upping the pressure on Mark Meadows by leaking more of the messages earlier this week. First to CNN and confirmed by CBS News, which reveal more of the communications to and from Mark Meadows before January 6th, on January 6th, and after. And perhaps the after message was the most provocative yesterday from Marjorie Taylor Greene, talking about the possibility of invoking martial law on January 17th. The committee is trying to communicate through its legal filings why it still needs to hear from Mark Meadows, even as they try to wrap up their work.
You said more than 2,000 messages he shared with the committee so far?
The messages can be counted in the hundreds or thousands, but what they still want to get can likely also be counted in the hundreds or thousands.
Do they know what he's withholding? I mean, could it just be something with his wife about what to bring home for dinner? Or
I don't
is it
know.
Something related to Jan 6?
That's a good question. I don't know if they will say they know what he's withholding, but read it this way. He's released some. They've been considered interesting and striking. So what could he possibly be withholding? Are they more interesting or more striking?
Yeah, totally understood. With Congress back from their Easter recess, most of the Biden cabinet's on Capitol Hill this week for budget hearings and standard updates on operations and department policy. The Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has to make multiple appearances this week before House and Senate committees, and he's already been asked about many things. But what specifically is he saying about the January 6th investigation?
We're expecting him to face questions today from the Senate Appropriations Committee about January 6th. He faced a sum total of 0 questions from the Senate Appropriations Committee about January 6th. As you mentioned, this is the time of year the cabinet secretaries come up here to ask for money, to ask for appropriations. And Attorney General Garland was asked about the crime spike in many American communities, and he responded by saying, this is why we need more money from Congress. More than $1 billion of an increase from last year to spend on things like grants to hire police officers in local communities, for things like federal law enforcement task forces, which help many American communities deal with big, sweeping crime rings. It's the time of year to ask for money, so members of the administration are not afraid or not shy to acknowledge a problem that they want to try to solve. Tomorrow, the Homeland Security Secretary is here, and he will say, in so many words, that the border crisis will likely worsen next month when they take down the Title 42 pandemic provisions that slowed border crossings. But again, he's here this week to ask for funding and appropriations. It's just the time of year when members of the administration are willing to publicly acknowledge and enunciate a problem.
They literally can run into each other in the coffee shop in the basement in between their hearings, the cabinet secretaries can. They come asking for money, and this is when lawmakers attach the strings to that funding in those public hearings. You're reporting also on something that I think is one of the most egregious and underreported aspects of Congress these days, proxy voting. It's hitting about the 2-year mark now, and there's been a lot of controversy surrounding it. Why and what on earth is next for what has become vote by, I guess, vote from home or vote from the campaign trail?
Proxy voting is hitting the 2-year anniversary, just like the pandemic recently did. This was enacted by the U.S. House in spring 2020 to deal with the public health emergency, a proxy voting system that allows some members of Congress to stay home or stay in their district offices and allow a colleague to vote in their stead to limit their exposure at the time to the pandemic. Just like many tools Congress employs for its own use, there are interesting uses for that tool. In the time since, we've seen members of Congress employ the proxy vote simply to skip the trip back here to Washington. We saw cases where members used a proxy vote so they could attend fundraisers, to attend political events in their district, to campaign for other offices. We saw an assortment of other cases, Ed, where a member of Congress is using it for eye surgery, for paternity leave, to stay home with a newborn. And among the fiercest critics of proxy voting, the minority party, the Republicans, who said if they take over the U.S. House, they will end proxy voting as a first order of business. So we brought a question to Elise Stefanik, the House Republican Conference Chair, the congresswoman from upstate New York, about her thoughts on proxy voting. And she says it's a rule of the House that has to go. We interjected and asked her about the time she used a proxy vote to attend a Donald Trump event. And she said, it's the rule of the House. I was following the rule of the House. Don't look for hypocrisy here. You'll see it on both sides. You'll see questionable use on both sides, but at least through November, it appears proxy voting is likely to stay.
They have one job.
Vote.
Go to Washington, write, debate, and vote on legislation. Why this has been allowed to go on, I don't know. But I'm glad you're looking into it. Scott MacFarlane, who covers Capitol Hill for CBS News, we thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ed.
Take care.